I am really impressed that Chris coordinated his video shirt with his live shirt. I thought that was absolutely amazing. I think we should make that a normal practice here from here on out. So I am glad to be sharing this psalm with you this morning. I have found it personally very much an encouragement, and I certainly hope it is to you guys as well. So imagine being ghosted. Imagine being ghosted. Now, some of you are like, I don't have to imagine it. I've been ghosted, and it's really lousy. And now others of you are saying, what's he talking about? What does he mean by being ghosted? I don't get it because you're older. And only the younger people really understand this, unless for whatever reason you had you come across it. I actually didn't really quite understand this, and it just sounded like kind of normal stuff, but it isn't normal. It apparently is it's a thing nowadays, like so much so that like they're writing articles about it, and there's like, psychological evaluations of people who are ghosted and how to get over it, and people who do ghosting, or I don't think you say it like that. Anyway, so back in the dark ages when I was dating, Cheryl and I, this is before smartphones, believe it or not. So we dated before, actually we didn't carry phones when we first met at all. Not even like the flip phone was like the first thing, and it happened after we met. So anyway, it goes back way back in time. And so ghosting is when you're in a conversation with someone, usually texting, social media of some sort, and you're like, hey man, had a really great time the other night, looking forward to the next time we can hang out. Nothing. And you get nothing back. So you wait a little while, hopefully not trying to sound too desperate, and you text back and you're like, hey, hey, hope everything is good. You all right? Nothing. Then the third or fourth or fifth time that you reach out, and that's getting a little desperate, then you start throwing like a couple of question marks out there. Hey, you there? Just looking for it. Nothing. You've been ghosted. It's really quite lousy, and apparently is part of this modern day. So they say that 20 to 25% of Americans have been ghosted, but they say 80% of millennials have been ghosted or have ghosted. So I want to show of hands to say how many. No, I'm not going to. We're not going to actually do it. It's like insult to injury, but it's like a thing. And of course, you can imagine why it would hurt. Last week, we were looking at Psalm 5, and we were encouraging each other to cry out to God, even when God isn't taking care in the way that He ought to, or at least in the way we thought He ought to. When our enemies we weren't being delivered from them, to still cry out to God. When you feel unworthy because of your sin, cry out to God. That's what we looked at last week. But imagine being ghosted by God. Imagine being ghosted by God. How can you find refreshment in God when He ghosts you? When He forgets about you? Years ago, when I had first come to New York, Cheryl and I took our first pastorate right out of seminary. We met a friend at another church, and he had 5 kids, and that's a lot of kids nowadays. And he had just had the 5th kid, and they were coming back to church one of the first times. And so he says he pulled up to church, and he dropped off his family, and they all piled out of his van. And then he went to the parking lot, drove off to the parking lot and parked, and then he walked back to the church building, not Beacon, and he went back to the church building, and he said, hey, everyone, how you doing? I'm greeting him. And so someone finally said, hey, how's the new baby? And he stops, wide-eyed, pivots, sprints back to the parking lot, where he remembers he left the baby in the back of the car. Fortunately, it was only for a few minutes because, but he had 5 kids. Like, he just lost track at some point and actually ended up leaving. He said he was terrified. His heart was beating 1,000 miles a minute. And you got to kind of wonder what the kid was feeling. Like, just how upset would you be if you figured out that you had been forgotten? And I think sometimes it feels like we've been ghosted by God. Sometimes I feel like he must have so many kids that he just sort of forgot about this one. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever felt this sensation? Sometimes your head tells you, no, my theology doesn't let that happen, and so, okay, but your heart says something altogether different. Even if you know how God is and who God is, it doesn't mean it changes how you feel. This is hardly a modern phenomenon. 3,000 years ago, one of God's most beloved followers felt utterly and completely ghosted. Open up, if you would, in a Bible to Psalm 13. We're going to be looking at Psalm 13 this morning, and it's a short psalm. Most of these psalms that we've been looking at have been written by David. David, of course, was this man after God's own heart. That's how the Bible describes him. He started out as a shepherd boy and became the most powerful king that Israel had ever seen. And he brought in the golden era of Israelite history. It was an amazing time in history. God had absolutely poured out his favor and his love on King David. And he was also a gifted poet and musician. So we're looking at one of his psalms, Psalm 13. Starting in verse 1. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I'll sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Enough is enough already. I think there's a whole lot of folks that want to say that to 2020. We're watching some of the political cartoons. They're ready to just turn the calendar and see if we can just start this whole thing over, because enough is enough already. We just can't take any more. Have you ever wanted to cry that out to God? Enough is enough already. So say that out loud with me here. Even at home, you guys can say it out loud as well. We won't hear you, but we will hear you guys. So let's say it out loud together. Enough is enough already. Now, say it again, but with a little bit more passion. Enough is enough already. Now say it with a tinge of anger. Add some anger to that, all right? Modify that voice a little bit. Ready? Enough is enough already. And now, one last time with resignation. Enough is enough already. 4 times the psalmist laments. 4 times, just like that. How long? How long? And from the reading of those first 2 verses, it doesn't seem like he's got much hope that it's going to be ending. How long? See, God could end it. The psalmist seems to think he should end it, but of course, he isn't. How long? And with each one of those cries, the psalmist details one particular challenge that he's facing. Verse 1, how long, Lord, will you forget me? How long? He's forgotten. Now, of course, being forgotten, this is not a cognitive thing. God doesn't really forget. The way the Hebrews use this word is that it's really like something that you're supposed to do that you don't do. Not that you forgot to do it, right? He's not like starting to lose things. He's not like an older guy who doesn't know what state he's in or like who the last president was or anything like that. Like that's not happening to him. God doesn't forget things. It's actually worse than that. The idea here is that he's refusing to act on your behalf. He's withholding the good that is within his power to give. See, forgetting here is a failure. It's a refusal to act on the good of the psalmist. And the way he says it is, will you keep forgetting about me? Will you continue to refuse to help? Then he goes on to say, how long will you hide your face from me? So now God is somehow shrouded. He's being hidden. He's withdrawn himself. He's hiding his face from the psalmist. So what does it mean to hide the face? Well, there's a very famous blessing in the scriptures. They call it the Aaronic blessing. It was from Aaron, and Moses was told Aaron to use this blessing to bless the people of Israel. And it became famous not only through Judaism, but through much of Christianity as well. It's found in Numbers chapter 6. And it says, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. What a beautiful promise. It's actually a covenant promise. This is part of the covenant that God made with the Jewish people. This was how God was going to act on your behalf as his people. He was going to bless you. His face was going to shine upon you. See, when you see a loved one that you haven't seen for a while, what do they say? They say your face lit up, right? You can actually see how a face lights up. It doesn't like light up, but it lights up. We all understand it. Even your eyes, they can light up, and we know what that experience is. Or when somebody turns their face towards you, right? We're living in the whole smartphone generation, so you can go out and you can see two people sitting at a restaurant together, and they're both staring at their phones, right? And so if they put their phones down and they actually turn toward each other, now there's connection. Now there's relationship happening. You need the face to be turned toward them because now you've got their undivided attention. I also note in this that the fact that it says that he hid his face, right? That he hid his face. That to me means something because it means at one point the face wasn't hidden. So at one point he was receiving the blessing. He experienced the blessing in the presence of God, and now God has withdrawn his presence. See, this is a promise that the covenant God had made to the people, and the psalmist is calling him out, saying, where is the promise of this covenant? Where is it? I once had your gaze upon my life. Well, at one point you had turned your face toward me. You had given me your undivided attention, but no more. No more. Then he goes on in verse 2, how long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? And so now he is wrestling. This action on God's part has put him into an emotional tailspin. And he is wrestling with these dark thoughts and these uncontrollable emotions. He's not experiencing it just here anymore. This is now breaking his heart. These are difficult challenges. You know, so often when we're going through like physical challenges of some sort, or we're going through some sort of circumstance that's very challenging, right? You've got a work circumstance, or you have a relationship that you're working through and it's hard and it's difficult, and you got all these different challenges we face. So often Christians revert to this idea that, well, as long as I have the presence of God, I'm okay. And and that's what he no longer has. You see, we like to say, all right, no matter what I'm facing in life, as long as God is with me, as long as I can feel his presence, as long as he gives me peace, like the promise of the covenant, as long as he gives me peace, then I'll be able to handle whatever life throws at me. And here the psalmist doesn't have it anymore. He's going into some very dark places. Then he goes on to say, how long will my enemy triumph over me? And so now he just feels like he is soon to be beaten. And what's interesting to me about this, the way he phrases it here, when he says this kind of, how long will my enemy triumph? The focus, he acknowledges an enemy, but the focus isn't on the enemy. He's not saying, shame on you, my enemies, for coming after me. He's going to God and he's saying, how long are you going to let this continue? Even though he acknowledges the presence of an enemy, the focus hasn't shifted from God. How can you let this continue? Scholars actually aren't even sure there's like real enemies. They're thinking this even might be like a personified kind of a thing because of sickness that they think he might have been going through at the time, or even that he was close to death for a variety of reasons. And so, but the point really is that God could stop it, but he isn't. So he just says, how long? And it indicates a prolonged struggle. And I think this might actually be one of the chief reasons that Christians will often feel abandoned by God, right? So when a crisis hits, when you have those sharp, bitter moments, often that causes us to run to Jesus. But something about the prolonged challenges, when they go on week after week and month after month and year after year, something about those cause us to start to move away from Jesus. The sharp, painful moments that we know are going to be over soon aren't what will often put us in the most jeopardy of giving up. So if you feel like you've been in a crucible for a very long time, if you feel like the heat is just never turning down, and you feel like just when it's supposed to turn down, it just gets turned up even higher, then you know what the psalmist is going through. I know we've experienced it. I know our family has. I know many of you guys have experienced it where it just feels like it's just simply too long. Enough is enough. And so what does he do? He turns around and he asks God to turn his favor back toward him. How? How does he do this? Despite his repeated desolations and his replayed despairs, the psalmist returns to his only hope. He's frustrated, he's angry, he's discouraged. He isn't even sure that God is listening, and yet he turns back to him. Now the psalm is broken up into these three sections. It's 6 verses. It's the first 2 verses, then 2 and then 3 and 4, and then 5 and 6. And these next two, in 3 and 4, he says, "Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall." So even though it felt like God abandoned him, he was still able to turn his mind and his words back to God. See, David believes that without God's intervention, he is lost. And based on the language that he uses here, I tend to think that he was really entering into kind of that pit of despair sort of thing. That there were some depressive moments. There was anxiety that was starting to pull him down, which is not something that Christians are super comfortable with. Because, of course, Christians, we ought to do better. We ought to know better. We ought to always have the presence of God and the peace and abundant living and all of that kind of stuff. And yet, that's not what we see. Not here and not throughout history. There was a famous preacher, Charles Spurgeon. He was called the Prince of Preachers. Like, imagine having that title. You're like the prince of all preachers. Like, you're the best of all preachers. And by many accounts, he really was. He was certainly one of the most prolific. He produced 63 volumes, 25 million words. Some people say that no one has produced more content, no single person, than Charles Spurgeon. His congregation grew from a very small one to be the largest congregation in the entire world at the time. To give you an example, and there's all sorts of anecdotes about his life. You could give hundreds of different kinds of examples. But one day, a woman went to the market, and she bought a pound of butter. And in the day, the butcher there, the supermarket, they wrapped the butter in newspaper, leftover newspaper from previous days. She got home, she opened it up, and she noticed that the newspaper they had used had one of Spurgeon's sermons printed on it. And so she read one page of Spurgeon's sermon and came to complete faith and surrender in Christ. That's what Spurgeon can do. That's the kind of a guy he was. They said that at one point he was like practicing in their new auditorium, like just like kind of hearing the acoustics, and he said something about Jesus and the Lamb of God taking away the sins of the world, and there was a guy working in the rafters. He came to faith in Christ from that declaration of Spurgeon. Like, this is the kind of a thing that happened in his life all the time. The prince of preachers. He also suffered debilitating depression and anxiety. Debilitating. Ever since he was a child, people have gone through all of his writings, and they've sort of condensed some of the reasons, some of the things that might have caused Spurgeon to wrestle with despair. And from his own writings, they note that it's possible that it was a chemical imbalance that he had since birth, because he was one of those kids that was always sort of melancholy. Now keep in mind, they say he had a great sense of humor, that people loved to be around him. He was sort of the life of the party, and yet he continually wrestled. Others have pointed out that he has chronic illness and physical pain most of his life. He suffered with excruciating pain that often took him out of the pulpit for weeks on end. He faced trauma. He referenced the burden of his work, the struggle of fame, which he never sought, the struggle of failure, which he faced often, the controversies that surrounded him, the criticisms that were constantly laid against him. His wife even noted that he went into tailspins when the weather went wet and gray. So he had seasonal affect disorder. This would often put him into these downward spirals that he struggled with for his long, painful life. And this was one of God's favored children. What are God's children to do with stuff like that? With this sort of reality, the psalmist is specifically asking God to look, to answer, and to give light. What does he mean by that? Well, in Exodus chapter 2, it says, during that long period, the Israelites groaned in their slavery. This is back when they're in Egypt, before Moses led them out of slavery, freed them. And they cried out. God heard their groanings, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham. You see, we're back to covenant kind of ideas. The covenant with Abraham. So God looked upon them. When the psalmist says, look, he's saying, this is what I want. I want you to look upon my circumstances. I want you to be concerned. I want you to show the kind of love that we know you show to your children who suffer. He's referencing the covenant of Abraham. Well, this goes back to Genesis 12, where it says, the Lord had said to Abram, that's Abraham, go from your country to the land I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That's the Abrahamic covenant. And so we see these blessings showing up again and again. It was repeated in Numbers that we looked at earlier with the Aaronic blessing. And so they're asking God, and the psalmist is asking God, he's saying, listen, I need you to turn your favor back toward me. He is asking for the fulfillment of the covenant. That's what he's claiming here. The promise of the restoration, that the blessing for Abraham and the blessing on Moses and Aaron and from Moses and Aaron. How in the world can the psalmist find the faith and the strength to cry out? And it seems as if it's because he was able to take a long, reflective breath. And he is able to press into God's unfailing love by trusting in God's covenant promises. And sometimes this is where faith really starts to kick in, because it's where it gets distanced from our feelings. Faith, a statement of trust in who God is. Back in Psalm 13, look at verses 5 and 6. He says, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." Now, last week we saw how the poet used the actual structure of the psalm to make his point, right? And we looked at this little thing, the chiasm, you remember, the A and the B and the C, and then the C is kind of the focus. And so the poet is able to weave into the very structure of the poem the message, the lesson for us. And I think we also get to see that happen here. There's something very kind of interesting and I think very, very cool going on. It might be nerding out just a little bit, but I think it's very, very cool. I told you the psalm is broken up in 6 verses, 3 parts. Verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All right. That's the overall structure of the psalm. But they're not equal length. The first 2 verses are way longer than the last 2 verses. He uses more words. There's 4 cries that are here in the first two verses. Then he moves into the second part, and he uses even less words, and they're smoothed out. And he uses really 3 prayers. So he goes from 4 chaotic complaints and laments to 3 sort of smoothed out prayers, but he ends with the shortest 2 verses. And it's really just a 2-part song. It's almost as if by this building the structure itself, the psalmist is sort of taking us through the emotional makeup that he was going through on a much broader scale and probably on a near daily basis. What starts with this sort of intensity emotionally in verses 1 and 2 starts to find its intensity wane and a calm sort of press in. It's almost as if he's being talked off the cliff. And it ends in really what you could think of as a deep breath, a sigh almost. I don't know, have anybody ever done breathing exercises? Have you guys ever done these things? Like, it's kind of a thing, right? And so I used to wear an Apple Watch, but like every couple hours, it would tell me I should stop and take breaths. It was super irritating. And it's like, hey, you seem anxious. I'm like, thanks. Like, I needed you to, and it's like, oh, you should stop, take some breaths. And so they would walk you through these breathing exercises, right? Sorry, so let's do a little quick breathing. All right, ready? Deep breath. Hold it and breathe slowly out. All right, try it again. Ready? Breathe in. Hold it. Long breath out. Do this a few times and you'll start to feel everything settle in just a little bit. What starts in manic distress ends in a Christ calmness. I was doing this at the beginning of all of these crises back in the early COVID days. I knew things were going on. I was feeling the pressure. And nearly every day I would just take some time to reflect, to worship, to rest in the promises of God. And it was sweet. It gave me reserves as I was kind of going through these tough days. I was trying to get off the manic and get into the peace. I was trying to get out of this tumultuous, constant questioning and get into the trust. And it was so sweet. And then I got so busy, I just didn't have time for it anymore. You can imagine how that turns out. Emotionally, I feel it. Even this week, I was trying to get back to those old disciplines, these sort of reflective, meditative, these deep sighs of the soul where we're trying to reach out and connect and build this trust despite the emotional turmoil that we feel. You know, Christians, we had the corner on prayerful meditation for many, many, many centuries, really throughout most of our history. And then we sort of gave up that ground to the New Agers and the yogis, and we need to take it back. It's a gift that God has given us, and it's outlined for us even right here, that you take where you are at with all of your frustrations and all of your heartaches, and you bring all of those circumstances. You'll see there are three major things he's facing, and there are three prayers that he's offered, and then he has given three resolves as a result. If you study the psalm, you'll just see this, and he just ends in this sort of calm place. How? What is it we need to do when we're in those meditative, reflective places? And you know, it's not emptying yourself. That's a totally pagan, secular way of doing it. You're not trying to empty yourself. You're taking the self and you're bringing it into the presence of God. You're filling up. And so what is it you focus on in those moments? You fill yourself with Hesed. Go ahead and say that with me. Hesed. God's unfailing love is one of the most important words in the whole of the Old Testament. It is used 250 times nearly in the Old Testament. Half of those occurrences are in the Psalms, in one very large book of the Old Testament. Half. So when the Hebrew people sang songs, they sang songs about God's chesed. Go ahead and say it again. Chesed. You got to do a little bit of the... I know that's not like socially acceptable nowadays. Anyway, that's how you got to chesed. And it's a powerful, powerful idea because it's a covenant word. It goes back to Deuteronomy 7. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is a faithful God, keeping his covenant of love, chesed, his covenant of chesed to 1,000 generations. This is the loyalty that describes God's disposition toward his people. And when David didn't feel it, that's where he went to. That's what he depended on. That's what he cried out for. That's the promise he searched for. And you see, it was Hesed that was behind the Abrahamic covenant. And it was Hesed that caused Moses to tell Aaron to say the blessing among the people. And it was also God's chesed that promised the Israelite people that there would be a new covenant. The prophets, quite some time later, Jeremiah, he said, the days are coming when I will make a new covenant with the people. Remember, this has all been about covenant language so far, and it's what David has continued to go back to. It's the promises of God, and they're saying there's a new promise of God. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors, for I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. The new covenant has to do with the forgiveness of our sins, where God will in fact forget, but not forget us. He will forget our sins. And how is it that he does that? You go into the New Testament in the book of Hebrews, and it says Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. He is the sign of the new covenant. In fact, he brought it to us. The ministry of Jesus, the ministry Jesus has received is as superior to theirs as the covenant of which he is mediator is superior to the old one. Since the new covenant is established on better promises, for this reason Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. You see, we understand Hesed better than even King David did. because we understand that it wasn't simply the Abrahamic covenant, it wasn't the Mosaic covenant, it wasn't the promised blessing of Abraham of Aaron. It was something far greater. It would be God's own Son through his own blood, his own sacrifice, securing for us. You want to know how far God's chesed will go? Then you look to the cross. That's how far his unfailing covenant promise goes. Chesed means that God would love us at the expense of his own Son. It means that Jesus would leave the heavenly throne room and he would endure God turning his face away from the Son. And he would wrestle with his own dark and despairing thoughts. And Jesus would feel abandoned by God. And Jesus would experience his enemies triumphing over him. And he did it all so that we might be able to come back to God and be recipients of this new covenant of chesed. Listen, when you feel ghosted by God, you can ask the hard questions. The psalmist certainly did. You can as well. You can ask him the hard questions. Just do it with humility. Don't do it with a sort of arrogant outrage. The psalmist, he struggled in all of these different areas, spiritually, relationship to God, emotionally, with himself, with his enemy or his circumstances. He had all of these different struggles in his prayers. He had distress in those areas. He had prayers in those areas, and he felt the transformation in all of those areas as he went back to the covenant promise of God. No matter where you are feeling abandoned or distressed or despairing or overwhelmed, God is in fact your hope. And he has long proven his love to you so that you can remember in the darkest of days when we feel abandoned by God, many saints have walked those paths before you. Many have walked those paths. You know, Christians, I know we're not actually, this isn't like supposed to be a Christian thing. You know, we're supposed to live victorious and have the abundant life. And if any Christians dare reveal to each other just how much they're struggling, others kind of look at them sideways like, oh man, you must not be a real Christian. I don't know what sin you got going on in your life that must be causing God to be doing these things to you. And yet throughout history, you have seen this very thing happen. And if we are not honest with ourselves, we will continue to hide them. And if we are not safe people who can hear these cries of our brothers and sisters, then we will cause them to go further into those dark places rather than be able to encourage and secure them and help them to come out. We need to trust in God's chesed to get you through the despair. Back to Charles Spurgeon. As I wrap up, I just wanted to tell you a couple things he observed. He said, if you drink of the river of affliction near its outfall, meaning the end of the river, where affliction ends in your life, it's brackish, salt water. It's bitter. It's offensive to the taste. So if you have affliction, it's offensive to the taste where you experience it. But if you will trace it to its source, where the river of affliction began, where it rises at the foot of the throne of God, you will find its waters to be sweet and health-giving. How did he endure? He's saying, listen, if you understood what God was doing in your soul, you would recognize that though it tastes bitter, here, what God is doing is sweet and health-giving. He knows God's unfailing loyalty. He trusts it even when he doesn't feel it. And he knows that these afflictions aren't here because of a universe that has gone out of control. In fact, he goes on to say, as long as I trace my pain to an accident, my bereavement to a mistake, my loss to another's wrong, my discomfort to an enemy, and so on, I am of the earth, meaning he's worldly, he's secular, and shall break my teeth with gravel stones. He's saying it's like chewing on rocks if you continue to see the world as happening to you apart from God's working. But when I rise to my God and see his hand at work, I grow calm. I have not a word of discontent. Allow the confidence and the trust in God's covenant love to take all of that chaos and to bring it into a settled peace and calm as we await the promised fulfillment. He is faithful. He will come through. This life or the next, it's his decision. Let me pray. Lord, I'm asking that you would help us to wrestle through these texts, Father, in our own hearts and our own ways. It is so easy, Lord, for us to think of the heartache and the misery as needing to come to a quick and speedy end. And yet, Lord, you say that we can trust you in the midst of it. Even when we don't feel your presence, we can trust your goodness. Lord, we often know that this is where real faith kicks in, where we trust despite what our hearts are saying. I know folks here are struggling, Lord. I know many have been reaching out for prayer and they need encouragement. May your people support their brothers and sisters, their spiritual family, their communities with the promise of your faithful love. We're asking, Lord, as you have watched your people, please turn your face back toward us and give us peace. We pray it in Christ's name. Amen.